starting off, as you can see by the title, I want to talk about the current state of American politics, and namely what it's going to look like in 2024 and in the near future, and what the results could be in the far future. Now, obviously, we're not going to know far future, and the longer time goes on, the harder it is to predict what will actually happen. But fortunately or unfortunately, we have a rough idea of what the near future of modern American politics looks like, and currently it looks pretty bad. If you look at it from an aspect of stability or civility, either way, American politics is breaking down. So to start off with this aspect of civility, for many, many decades, America was a country that had some of the most amazing intellectuals propagating its halls of Congress, its judicial system, and all the major institutions in the country. And along with that was this sort of code of honor in how politics was done. So making deals, making concessions, constantly meeting up to determine the future of the country from a bipartisan perspective. So even though there were many different ideals, two notable party lines, the country still maintained some amount of stability, and the people would come together to discuss the future of the country. And fortunately, during that time, the amount of issues, not really the issues, but the amount of different ideologies in the country was pretty narrow, all things considered. If you look at a broad political spectrum across all of human history, the American politics of like the 1980s, the 1960s, such a narrow difference between the major political parties. Now that difference has widened significantly. So that civility is breaking down because it went from issues of how do we have the same, first we have the same goal, or we identify the same problem. And that problem could be anything, bad schools, bad roads. We identify the same problem, Republicans and Democrats. We want the same solution: good schools, good roads, peace, good health, whatever it is. Same problem, same solution, different ways of going about it. So that could be, when in terms of education, grants for more teachers, or better pay for teachers, or school of choice, or any mechanism to fix the problem identification and get to the end goal that is desired. Along the way, though, that has completely broken down. So that problem identification has completely changed. So you have people on the right who want this concept of traditional values, personal freedom, but also some sort of, it has to live by the mechanism of a society, much more willing to sacrifice, very family-oriented. And on the left, you have more of this individualistic, more fluid perspective of how people can live their lives, less emphasis on the family. And that's not to say either of those is right or wrong, but it is slowly breaking apart what Americans want on both sides of the political aisle. They want generally different things. And now, instead of issues of schools and roads and whatever, you're having issues that are so just binary that you can't make consensus on it, really. So things like abortion, things like transgenderism, things like the economic system we use being, capitalism or communism. And you can't reconcile those two things because it's completely different. One side wants the antithesis of what the other side wants. So in a lot of cases, you see different problem recognition. So the right says, we have a problem with the border. And the left says, that's not a problem. The left says, we have a problem with women's reproductive rights. And they don't have access to abortion. And the right says, that's not a problem. We don't want that. And so you have these totally different problems. You have totally different outcomes that you desire. Like the left is really big on equity, equality, and that is a direct outcome. That's what you're shooting for, is everybody becomes equal. Full stop. That's the end. Republicans, along that same vein, is everybody has equal opportunity, but we're not striving for equity. We're not striving for equality of outcome, because that's just something totally unreasonable to us. And so when you look at things that way, they have completely different goals. One's trying to equitize at the end, one's trying to equitize at the beginning. Doesn't work, because you're aiming at two completely different things. If you're both aiming at two completely different targets, of course you're not going to hit the same target. I mean, obviously. And again, that's not saying either one is right or wrong. It's just saying, like, that's happening on both sides of the aisle, is you're splitting apart through the problems you see, the end goal you desire, and the mechanisms you take to get to those. So that's where you have this dual society, basically, this dual political system, that it's no longer just two political parties trying to achieve the same thing from different mechanisms. You have two countries living in one. The fact that your identification of a political party, like if somebody says, I'm a Republican, I can guess basically everything about that person's ideology, their lifestyle, their habits, their hobbies, all of that, right? Like, left or right. If somebody says, I'm a liberal, you can just guess a lot about their worldview, their perspective on life, how they live their life. And you'd probably be right most of the time. And so that fracture that has happened goes deep, goes really deep into, like I said, the fact that people's worldviews, how they live their lives, are split beyond political lines. Very binary, so very specifically one or the other. And so you have these two countries living in one, and that is a recipe for disaster, pretty naturally, right? If you have two societies living in one, either one's going to outpace the other, or they're both going to get destroyed, right? You have two organisms competing in the same ecosystem for the alpha predator spot, and it's not going to happen where they can split it evenly. Either they'll both die, or one will overpower the other. And so that's been that constant fight for the last several decades. A fight that has been happening, believe it or not, behind closed doors mostly. So as politically charged as America is and as divisive, that sort of battle was hidden behind the veneer of that political compliance, that code of honor that I had talked about at the beginning. You wheel and deal, and you try to hide your objectives, and you do a little bit of wordplay and all that sort of thing. You try to legislatively, maneuver around, and it's very subtle. It was done in a subtle way. And that was the case until 2015, when Trump came onto the scene. And left or right, I think we can all agree there is nothing subtle about Donald Trump. He is the least subtle person on the planet. And what he's going to do is he's going to come in like a wrecking ball, and he's going to make all his opinions known. He called out the media, calling them corrupt, fake news. He wasn't holding back any of his opinions. He called DC a swamp. There's a deep state. And so Dave Chappelle said it best. If you ever had watched Dave Chappelle's skit on SNL, Trump's in there playing the game. He's in the house, runs out of the house, to all the townsfolk and says, everything you think we're doing in that house, we're doing. And then runs right back inside and keeps playing the game. He's the only person who is ever really in that elitist class who had the ability to exit that house, that wheeling and dealing game that the public doesn't know about, and say, everything you think you're doing, we're doing, all the corruption. Yeah, we're doing all of that. And then Trump actively says, though I've benefited from it, it is my desire to eliminate it. And that sparked this total, almost arms race between Trump and what we perceive as the deep state or the traditional government, left and right. First started with the right. Obviously, Trump, they tried to knock him out fast. The Republican Party did not like Trump. He was an invasive species. And in the course of a year, he went from being TV personality Mr. Trump to the face of the Republican Party. And he has held that position ever since, to the point where now he has 60% of the Republican base on lock. Like, he is the guy. Like, Republicans are Trump. It's the Trump party. You know, Trump's name is the party. He's totally co-opted it. He's an invasive species, and he took over the entire ecosystem. And so in order to compete with him, the remaining, never Trumpers, the liberal Republicans, and the Democrat establishment needed to match his energy, match his aggression. So when Trump comes out and says they're all criminals and they're running this deep state operation and they're lying to you and they're stealing from you and they're cheating you, he came out and said, when he said all that, they had to return and say with very harsh language, Trump's a liar, he's a thief, he's a criminal, he's going to cause World War III. And so that kind of vitriolic language had to level up, right? Because it's like if you're playing Monopoly or you're playing a sport and everybody's you're playing soccer and everybody's walking, right? Gentlemanly, you don't trip other people. Everybody's kind of just having fun in the schoolyard. And then Trump comes in and starts tripping people, pushing people, hitting the ball as hard as possible. And if you want to compete in an environment against a guy like that, you better step it up or he's going to run over you. And that's exactly what happened. Is they said, oh, that civility's gone. We can't keep walking like the Republicans used to walk with us. We have to run like Trump is running. We need to attack and push people and fight. And so that vitriolic language from the mainstream media and the government ticked up increasingly in this arms race against Donald Trump. So Trump single-handedly, for better or worse, kind of completely destroyed America's veneer of honor. I think most people can agree on that. Even if you love him, you got to say he says whatever comes to mind. He doesn't pull punches. He doesn't act presidential in a traditional sense, like a newscaster who puts on a voice to speak. He doesn't do that. He just speaks, and people like that. They liked the brash honestness of Trump, and so he has dramatically changed how Americans interact. He totally ripped off the veneer. He pulled back the log, and you see all the little critters, all the pill bugs and everything running behind the scenes, all the ants and whatnot, and people were horrified by it. That, like, this is how things are actually done if you look into it. Like, people were threatening each other, people are getting into these legal battles, and all of that is, like, upped to the point where we're at now, where both sides of the political aisle actively say that the other side's candidate is corrupt and should be in prison. So, the Republicans, the Trump party, for all intents and purpose, say Biden's a criminal because of his dealings with his son and other dealings in Ukraine and China and how he sold his influence, on top of everything he's done with the border, neglecting it, and what they say, the Biden crime family. And then Biden says, and the Democrats supporting him, Trump is an insurrectionist, he's violent, he's called for violence, He's lied about his properties. He's committed a fraud. All of the sexual stuff he's been accused of. All of that is coming to a head because both sides want to imprison the other side's candidate, rightfully or unrightfully. It's a bad thing for America, and not bad when people say, "Oh, we should stop it," and just pretend it never happened and put the genie back in the bottle, roll the log back over, and pretend we never saw what we saw, all the worms crawling around. We can't do that. And so things like the No Labels Party, like, oh, let's just forget that we hate each other and we're completely different. That's not going to work. But at the same time, this kind of thing didn't happen in the past. You even had like presidents, if they were going to leave office, they were exonerated. Even like Clinton, everything kind of pushed under the rug, and Nixon, everything kind of pushed under the rug, and just said, just leave, right? Like, you're a president, you messed up. We're not going to imprison a president. That's a bad look. That's not what America does. You can't, and that isn't happening anymore. Both sides actively think the other side is criminal. And whether it's true or not, whatever side of the aisle you fall upon, and like I said, typically if you're on one side or the other, you believe most of everything that one side believes. It affects your life so deeply. You probably do believe the other side is corrupt. If you're red, you think blue's wrong. If you're blue, you think red's wrong. And whether that's true or not, whether Biden is corrupt or Trump is corrupt, the truth, the reality, doesn't matter as much as the perception of reality. So even if both are totally innocent, both sides think the other side is horribly, irredeemably corrupt. And so what do you do about that? You can't do much because people believe it. Whether it's true or not, they're not seeking truth. Some people are, but in the grand whole, they have attached themselves to a side that believes something and they refuse to let it go. And honestly, both have done things that, are capable of legal action, I would say, whether it should be as severe as it is or as nasty and aggressive as they want to, it's going to happen. And so you believe that. And so we have this huge problem with American philosophy on their politicians. And now that's reached it to democracy, right? We're talking about the big Democrat talking point of 2024. Trump's a threat to democracy. Letting you vote for a man you want is a threat to democracy because they think he's going to get in and be a dictator like he wasn't before. He didn't do it last time, but this time he's totally going to do it. But this concept of democracy is under threat is kind of legitimate because there was a recent poll, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's like a very large portion of both political parties think that elections are unfair. Like they will not believe if the other side wins. If Biden wins again, as we saw in 2020, a majority of Republicans think that he cheated. And Democrats polled believed that if Trump wins in 2024, they'll say Trump cheated. And so, truth be damned, whoever cheated or didn't cheat, people believe that the other side's going to cheat. And so you can't really do anything about that. You can't prove a negative. You can't regain institutional trust like that because there's not really a way for that institution to prove it's trustworthy. And so where do you go? You have no idea how to reconcile this, and they keep talking about, we need to bring this country together. That was the talking point in 2020, but not so much this year because unity is far gone. And even Biden isn't talking about unity anymore, right? He ran on, I was going to unify the country, and now he's trying to imprison his political opponent. His justice system was targeting Catholics for pro-abortion or for anti-abortion views, pro-life views. You have the absolute sham of the situation going on in New York with Trump, trying to cost him $500 million in order to even appeal his case. And so this is kind of breaking down, and unity is not even a talking point anymore. And I don't think it's possible either. People who want Kennedy to get in and say, oh, he can run third party and we'll have total unity, it's not going to happen. It's just not a reality. People are so diametrically opposed. Like, my idea of the liberal paradise is, or liberals' idea of their paradise is my idea of hell world, and I'm sure vice versa. You know, most liberals would not want to get sent to Texas, and most conservatives would not want to get sent to California to live those lives. They wouldn't. They see it as a disaster and a life that it's like a foreign country. They don't want to live there. They don't want to participate in it. And so how do you reconcile that? I don't think you can. And I think one side is going to eat the other eventually. And how nasty that gets depends on a couple factors. So one factor is who's driving the divide. So is this divide get eaten by left and right all the way top down, from congressmen down to your local grocer, your local carpenter? You know, is this right divide going to be completely split down the middle, this left-right divide, or are you going to see a more top-down split where people say, we don't trust the government, we want to see that kind of Civil War concept of breaking away from the government? But even then, it's not a pure split, because it's not pure government versus people, because there's still that ongoing political divide. Like, a lot of states, like California and Texas, are both not listening to the federal government's mandates on things, but for different reasons. That they don't listen to the federal government because they want to do whatever they want. And that would be fine if all the states agreed that the government's gotten too big and we all collectively want to ignore, like, these couple principles, you know, these 20 or 30 things we're just not going to do anymore. They don't want to ignore, they want to ignore the government to do the exact opposite of what the other state is doing. And so it's almost like three factions, where you have the left states, the right states, like the left states, the right states, and the federal government. And that is a weird situation, because, you know, no one's safe in a free-for-all, right? And it's kind of what it's turning into, is states against states, counties against counties, small government versus big government, people who were traditionally small government wanting big government to use big government as a mechanism to fix small government. Or vice versa. Like, very weird political identification, very weird uses of the mechanism of power. That's why I think you're seeing conservatives move from small government to big government. This concept of the left calling people on the right fascist. Not actually wrong. You know, not fascist in a way like they're going to round people up, but in a way of, we see disorder. There is no way to cure disorder on a small scale if the people on the small scale are not listening. If the governors, if the mayors of these cities are not listening, we need to take the mechanisms of control and tighten the belt and really put strain on things like crime needs to evaporate in this country. You know, any cartel activity needs to evaporate. Anything like that, we need to make incredibly tough federal mandates on all these things. And so the traditionally small government conservatives are saying the freedom of choice in order to pursue things on a local level has led to disaster. And so they want to seize more power. So that is kind of the new young Republican Party is combating with the old Democrat Party, which has mutated, but still preserves the idea of big government taking control. And so Republicans for a long time would passively agree. They would make compromises as we've seen everything shifted further left in the last several decades, Republicans compromise on everything. And slowly that kind of like middle has gotten further and further and further and further to the left. And the young people on the right don't want to compromise anymore. They actually don't want to compromise at all. And they're saying, we want full control. We want a clean, orderly, safe society. And we desire to limit some of our freedoms in order to do that. And that limiting of freedoms, which the left has also agreed to, is going to be the mechanism going forward. So the left has wanted to limit speech with things like hate speech, limit sort of activities like limit gun access, limit people's freedoms in a certain sense, freedoms like property rights, all sorts of things. And now the right wants to do the same thing, but inverse, but still using that mechanism of control, that mechanism of power to do so. So people who are young and on the right are so very, very different from people like Mitch McConnell, it's not even funny. And if you want to see what's going to happen in the future, you look at the 20-year-olds and like how completely different their worldviews are. That's where the future of this country lies, because right now the boomers have held on to power forever, and they are going to hold on to power until the day they die. Fortunately or unfortunately, that day is coming soon. Like, boomers are old. They're very old. They're going to lose power. No matter how hard Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell cling on to power, soon they'll be dead, by natural causes, hopefully, right? We pray that everybody goes from natural causes. But things like Biden's age and Trump's age are very, very old. Most of our politicians are very, very old. We currently have the oldest Congress we've ever had. And so what happens next? Well, there's a huge generational crash, right? An immense number of seats will open up for younger generations. And almost overnight, these people who've clung to power longer than they've ever had any right to, the ideology is going to shift like that. Like, it's going to go from here to here, like overnight. And the split is becoming wider on both the left and the right. So, young liberals, this Republicans and Democrats in like the 50s, kind of 80s, 90s, and this is where we're at now. And it's getting worse. And so as soon as the boomers who are kind of clinging to that, they're pulling these ropes together to kind of keep it somewhat in the middle, somewhat tactful. As soon as they go, those ropes get cut and those pillars just fall to one side or the other. And that is where the future of America sits in the near-ish future, the next several decades, sooner than you might think. You're seeing very far left podcasters, far right podcasters. Those people are where you're going to get your news from in the future. We already know more people watch podcasts than any major news network. And that is going to keep upticking. And so their ideas keep getting pushed further one direction or the other. Neither side wants to compromise. And I don't think that's exactly a bad thing, because compromise usually leaves both sides unhappy. And compromising, when you're a kid and you have to cut the chocolate bar in half, like, that's a compromise, right? But it's an acceptable compromise. You can't compromise on, does life begin at conception or not? You can't compromise on, should we have borders or not? Only a couple borders, right? Texas can have a border, but Arizona, we'll keep them from having a border. That's not how that works. And so that doesn't scale up well. That like kind of silly, childish argument you heard from your kindergarten teacher, like everybody's got to compromise. It doesn't scale up well, especially ideologies. And if you have a firm belief in an ideology, there's no compromising, right? Like, if you're a religious person, you don't compromise on your ideology. It's actually impossible to, because you believe your ideology is as real as gravity, as real as light. It is a universal constant, right? Like what God wants and doesn't want is not able to be compromised, right? More objective morality you cannot compromise on. Like you personally can go against it, but that doesn't change the fact that it's how it's supposed to work. You're actively fighting against nature in that regard. And so people's ideologies are solid. The young liberals on the left have a new ideology, and the young conservatives on the right who are, returning to religion, there's a smaller amount of them returning to religion, but the ones returning to religion have their faith and devotion has increased dramatically. So you can see that from mass attendance and church attendance in general has gone down over time, the amount of people, but the amount of people going to like daily church, daily mass has increased substantially, like sixfold. And so the people who are devoted are really devoted. And those people are going to be some of the people who are politicians. Gone are the eras of, well, I'm personally against it, but, I'll vote for it anyways. I'll compromise against my better judgment. That era's gone. That era of sacrificing for the other side, of meeting in the middle it's gone. You are going to enter an era of a knockout, drag out fight of, I will fight to the death for my ideology. I refuse to compromise on it. I have a solid worldview. I have solid problem identification, a solid goal in mind. I'm figuring out the mechanisms to reach that. And I understand that the other side is completely opposite of me. I understand that we cannot compromise on these issues. Like we can't meet in the middle about these things. And we're just hitting the iceberg of a lot of these issues, right? I mean, look at like the tech issues that'll be coming in the future. This is far future, but things like the Neuralink, that's a discussion. Anything to do with AI, anything to do with the fundamental structure of our society. We are so far away from roads and education being our number one problems. It's not even funny, right? Like, does the U.S. totally close its borders and leave the world stage, or do we keep acting as the world police? That is a big, big change for the rest of the world. And that's a discussion that's happening right now. Things like that are so aggressive, and they're the driving factors of these left-right ideologies. And what I predict will happen personally is I see the right winning out in the end, but of course I'm biased. But you can see a lot of people kind of waking up to the lies of the media, the lies of the government, realizing that all these major institutions are Democrat-run, very liberal institutions, and that how their innate belief that they can influence the reality of the world and are not beholden to it is driving them. It has been their driven factor for all their beliefs, right? Sexuality, consequence, anything like that, like human nature, we are not beholden to any of it. It is absolutely and fully in our control. And because in their opinion, there is no God, there is no higher authority, we can act in any way we desire. And it's up to us to decide those things. Versus the right, who the very, devout Christians, the main archetype of the right, says we are beholden to a God. We are beholden to our human nature. We can struggle against it, but we can never overcome it, right? You can struggle against your desire for lust or gluttony. As a human being, you will never be fully rid of it. It's partially in your fallen nature. And to not struggle against that is wrong. To not bring God into your life is wrong. We are beholden to nature. We are beholden to natural phenomena. We must do our best to maintain the structures we have in a world that wishes to tear them all down. And so that's even like the very, very core of these ideologies. And that is not reconcilable, right? Like one side believes that no matter what we do, there's certain things that cannot change. Traditions are there for a reason because they represent and are backed by the reality of human nature, backed by the reality of a God, things we have no control over. And the left wants to push the envelope and say everything is subjective, no objective reality, no objective morality. We can go whatever way we want. And so I think that has clicked on in a lot of people's heads that we've gone too far. Like there is a realization that we are not in control. Whether you believe in the Christian God or the concept of karma in the universe, you understand that there's a higher power. Spirituality is going up a little bit, not necessarily any identifiable religion, but the sense of like agnosticism is growing. And so this concept of there is something above us, very indecipherable in the left's opinion, and things like transgenderism for kids and pushing the envelope to there and saying like, I don't feel comfortable with this and we're going a little too far. That sort of thing is getting pulled back. And so I'd see the conservatives winning out on those issues. And if you can get people to agree on that very core of there are things we were beholden to. Human nature is one of them, right? Like communism is great on paper. Karl Marx just forgot to account for human nature, kind of a big deal. And people realize that eventually. And so I see the right winning out on that. And how this country shapes out, you're going to still have this massive struggle between these liberal strongholds. Chicago, New York, California, the liberal legislatures, the liberal governors, our liberal Congress people, they're going to hold on. The media is going to try to hold on, but they're losing power substantially and incrementally. Especially the media, the main mechanism people learn information and identify their information with other people. They corroborate it with other people. That's dying out. CNN's holding on by a thread. You've seen articles, maybe you have or haven't, that have said, like, this was a couple of years ago, that if it wasn't for airports and gyms, CNN wouldn't exist because it plays on those 24/7, but not in people's homes for anyone to actually watch. And same thing even with like Fox News. Like, have you ever watched Fox News? I like a little bit of news with my ads, right? 5 minutes of news and 55 minutes of ads, and they're all drug ads. If we ever reach a day where drug ads are not allowed to advertise on TV, which is a topic some people are discussing, Fox News dies, CNN dies, and so the media dies. Like, you're getting your news from Hassan or Patrick Bet-David or Candace Owens or Destiny. People are kind of doing more independent research. Their ideologies are expanding a little bit past traditional conservatism, traditional liberalism in America by America standards. And I think you'll see that in the end, the right will win out because these institutions will lose power. People realize that the same thing they've done for generations hasn't been working, right? Chicago has been a disaster forever. Same thing with New York. You have Democrat-run cities and they get run to the ground. People are fleeing California left and right. And so if the main objective is to remove these pseudo-government bodies, right? So the media is kind of just a mouthpiece for the government. And a lot of big businesses, with the way they lobby, the way they follow governmental instructions, like big tech, right? Big tech censoring conservatives. If those institutions die, I think this transition is more peaceful into a more conservative America. I think if we see some more desperation from them, it could end a little bit harsher. Like America could balkanize in the future. That is, far future, couple decades, but that is a real possibility. Is Texas leaves, California leaves, bunch of states leave, we break up, and people say civil war. They just say it. A civil war in the United States looks like states just leaving, but it's not a North versus South thing. It's a government versus states' rights thing. I mean, that's kind of what the original Civil War was about. Namely slavery was one of what the states' rights, what they wanted to do. But so states, but it's not a clean like North versus South. You have states spattered throughout the whole U.S. that are either conservative or liberal. Within those states, you have differing ideals. There's no hard unification between any of the states. And you could see states regain power. I mean, this ongoing border battle with Texas is like the name brand of what's happening here. Is they're constantly ignoring the government or filing things, or like just this week in general, you had Texas vindicated by the Supreme Court saying that they could remove the border, they could install a border, not listen to the Border Patrol agents, and then they were allowed to remove illegal immigrants if they were arrested, anything like that. All that was Texas was allowed to do by the Supreme Court. But then an appeals court, from the federal government said that they can't do that, right? So you're having these constant legal battles, and eventually the states might just say, we're not even going to fight you legal anymore. Like legally, we're just going to ignore you. We're just going to do whatever we want anyways. Now you can't stop us. So what are you going to do? Send 18-year-olds from Texas back to Texas to arrest their parents? Like, well, when you march into the streets with tanks, what can you do? Because it's like the Chinese finger trap analogy, right? Like the harder you pull, the harder it is to escape. And so that's what the government's doing. Is if they want to solidify their power, the states want to leave because they think the government has too much power and they're abusive. And so in order to keep the states from leaving, the government has to seize more power and be more abusive. And that just makes more people want to leave. And so it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't thing. Currently, like the states are cooperating legally, which is your best case scenario, is your states all agree to cooperate, and then along the lines kind of maybe find some peaceful negotiation from the federal government, a little bit backing down from the federal government. But at that very core, even in that circumstance, even if states are able to fight things out legally, there's no threat of secession, even then you still have this far left, far right divide in the country, causing problems that affect the rest of the country, like the border bill. Anything to do with morality, that is not in a vacuum, right? Like, and what New York says is morally acceptable does not stay in the boundaries of New York. It affects people all over the place, especially like Hollywood is a great example. Most of your media comes from Hollywood, right? Your movies, your TV shows. If Hollywood, California, thinks that certain morals should be shared and spread, that doesn't stop at California's borders. That spreads to the rest of the country. We've seen this actually spread to the rest of the world, not just the Western world. But this idea that like states can live in a vacuum within the United States and other states can do whatever they want and it won't affect them is just not the case. That's what's happened with like the infiltration of the educational system, right? It's very, very liberal now. Whether you like that or not, it's the reality, and a lot of people don't like it. And what can you do about it? Well, there's not much. You're beholden to this government. You're acting in a way of civility, but still you're not living in a vacuum. So what other states does affects you, and you don't have the power to stop them from doing it. Or they're, half the country loves it, half the country hates it. So unless one side totally devours the other in the next few years, politically, ideologically, I think states could break up in the future. Because even if the government loses power, the ideological battle, which precedes the government, right? The government's run by human beings with ideologies and worldviews. And if their ideologies and worldviews are very liberal or very conservative, whoever's in power is going to drive that worldview right down everybody else's throats, because that's what you do as a politician. That's what you do if you think you're right. Both sides think they're right. Why would you not force people to live by the rules that you think are right? If you think strong family values and high education and religious morality is all right, you would force that on other people. Gone is the era of you do you, politically speaking, that you have the freedom to do whatever they want, right? I wouldn't do it, but I respect their freedom to do it. No, because I don't live in a vacuum, right? When they do something, it still affects me, right? When I live in California and you have the free, if you say I live in California, I have the freedom to do whatever I want. I have the freedom to go to mass, go to church, have a family, have a strong career, right? Like I have the freedom to pursue those things. But in the course of doing so, everybody else seems to have the freedom to defecate on the street, to do drugs, to, commit crime, to negatively affect my life, right? You do not live in a vacuum. And so you are only able to pursue what's good and right if you have the environment to pursue what's good and right. And right now, most people don't. This concept of you do you on both sides of the aisle isn't working. Because sometimes there's just like, you can't you do you to some things. When it comes to like the direct access for children to have what they call gender affirming care, that's not a you do you thing anymore. When the teachers in your schools are educated to teach very liberal ideologies, that's not a you do you thing anymore. Like that, they're affecting your children. Yeah. What more can be said, right? Like it's not a you do you thing. It's totally beholden to what other people are doing. Whoever has the most power, they influence the world. And conservatives, another reason I think conservatives are going to win is because they've been walking during that soccer game and everybody else has been running, right? The Democrats have been running and pushing them over, and when the ref's not looking, punching the guy in the face. The Republicans have started to run. They've started to say, we don't care. We're not going to be, for the longest time, they're like, oh, we're the party of civility. If only people realized how, the Democrats manipulate and play the game. It's like young conservatives are realizing nobody's going to realize that. Nobody cares. And so I have to act in the same way. If I want to win this game, I've got to play just as hard as the other team's playing. I have to match their level. Like how, the major institutions of this country match Trump's energy and aggressiveness. The conservatives on the right are matching the Democrats' ability to push laws, to push ideology. The left has always been superior at that. Undoubtedly, that the left is just absolutely superior when it comes to pushing their ideology, creating laws, using the levers of mechanism, like using the levers of power, they're just better at it. And the conservatives just never played the game. They stood on their principles. The strong principled conservative, aka the neocon, aka a dying species, because nobody likes them because they're losing the game, right? If you're watching a soccer game and your team's walking and the other team's running, who wants to go and support a team who walks during every game, who loses intentionally and says, well, we're the ones playing by the rules, right? So you should cheer for us for our strong principledness. And people don't care about the principle. They care about the results. That's why they love Trump. Trump is, sometimes not great to listen to, right? Sometimes you cringe a little bit because they're very aggressive. He says whatever he wants, he's always willing to fight somebody. It doesn't sound good. It's not appealing, but like his results, hard to argue with. Great economy, strong borders comparatively, reverse on the ideology, dragging into the light of all these, like the news of the government. People care about the results, not the platitudes. And so the right will start pushing back with results. The Romneys and the McConnells they're gone next year. They're getting out of there. And it's going to be replaced with very young conservative people. very conservative people. And that's why I think the right will win too, is because they've been, demonstrating only 5% of their power, this whole time. If they get in there and they're pushing laws like crazy, they're abusing the mechanisms of power, the levers of power. Their media, they're creating things like The Chosen, that whole Angel Network, just dual media. Just Republicans just embrace the dual society. They refuse to try and hold on to the old tradition, being the only ones doing that. The left's pushing further left, the right cannot stay in the same place or they will get eaten whole. They're going to create their own dual society, our own news networks, right? Like Daily Wire, our own, anything, our own way of functioning and creating the society we desire. And in doing so, I don't think the left can handle that. I don't think they're ready for that. For conservatives to come in and say, I don't care. I don't even care about getting reelected. I'm going to go as hard as possible in the 4 years or 6 years or 2 years or whatever I have. So if that happens, I see the right winning out. I see a less likely future where America splits up because of that, because you would have a more unifying one side eats the other. Because the Democrats had their chance, and they were this close to eating the right. They were this close to winning completely. And one thing got in their way, one thing, and that was Donald Trump. Donald Trump single-handedly reversed the course of this country ideologically. And you may hate that, you may love it. I love it. But we have to admit, he's switched things up. He changed things. He opened the door for more independent ideas. He opened the door for more people to act in ways that were previously not capable. And so if the Trump party continues to push right as hard as the left pushes left, I think they will win. Because historically, that's always been the case. Like, things get very liberal, they fall apart. You form a strong government on the right, and the reality is, like a more nearing on fascist, nearing on kind of almost semi-totalitarian government to some degree to clean things up, and then slowly give people more freedoms. That's typically been the course throughout human history. Things get, the good men create good times create weak men create hard times create good men. That cycle, we're in that weak men create hard times. Everything's gotten progressively liberal. We've seen this over and over and over again throughout history. Next thing that comes is a strong man, which people say it's Trump. I don't think it's Trump. There's going to be somebody in the future who will be less civil than Trump, if you believe, who will be more willing to not cooperate with the other side, I believe, and will be in a better position to do so because there'll be less power in these other mechanisms to check him, namely things like the media. And so that is, I see the future of the country is, right now we're in this sense of like disgust, and the natural human reaction to disgust is order, is hard order. Because if you walk into a room and it's gross and it's smelly and there's trash everywhere and there's maggots, like, disgusting means dangerous, right? And so that disgust, I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about this, like in the brain, even politically speaking, like it's the same reaction, is disgust brings about order, is the human desire to create order. So you clean that place up, you get rid of the diseases, you get rid of the grime. And that's what's happening in the country is people are starting to wake up and say, I am disgusted by this place. There's too much crime. Like all of our cities are third world cities in a first world country. This total open border policy, the total degeneracy, like total sexual liberation, like it's just gross, It's disgusting. There's no order. And then the reaction to that is not, oh, each day I'll come in and I'll take a rotten apple out, and slowly over time I'll walk things back, right? I'll slowly no, it's you go in there with a hazmat suit and you burn the place down, right? Like you just cleanse everything. And it's painful and it's hard, but that's what's going to happen, is the total reversion, that rubber band effect of the right is going to, like, it's going to snap like crazy. This Overton window, so like where the furthest left person, the furthest right person in the country has slowly gotten further to the left, but eventually it's like there's resistance, there's a rubber band pulling on it, right? And eventually that's just going to snap, and we're going to go crazy far to the right. Like, it's not going to be a slow, like, oh, well, we'll go back to Romney Republicans, and then, then we'll get back to Nixon Republicans. It's like, nope, like Trump, and then further than Trump. And so the left is kind of right in their identification that that's probably what's going to happen. Right now, they're making it up. Like, Trump is not a fascist. Trump is not going to be a dictator. But if things continue to degenerate, you might get one in America. It's a harsh reality, but that's typically what's happened throughout human history. And we have no reason to believe it will not repeat that cycle here in this country, believing that this country is an exception to human nature, because it's not. It's exceptional in many, many different ways. But like the conservative belief believes, we are not exceptional to God. We are beholden to God. We are beholden to human nature. We are beholden to the principles that actually make a functioning, happy, healthy human being. That is another big thing, is the realization of the mental health crisis in this country. The further left we go, the more miserable people are. The happiest people in this country are religious conservatives. We know that every study says that. And it's just apparent. It's so apparent, and it's something people haven't really realized. It hasn't really clicked a lot, but it's starting to. And that will also push things further to the right. So that this experiment in liberalism, both politically and ideologically, liberating yourself from God, liberating yourself from the human capabilities, liberating yourself from sexual desires, or like sexual morality, like all that sort of stuff has not worked. It's a failed experiment. And unfortunately, it's a failed experiment that continues to repeat throughout history. The only saving grace is that each time it happens throughout history, people write about it, and we have more and more writings, more and more studies, more and more beliefs to believe that it doesn't work. That's the only saving grace of this repetitive cycle. Is sometimes it can be slowed, sometimes it can be sped through the bad times to lessen the damage, but you can't reverse it. You can't immediately go from bad times create, bad men create bad times to good men creating good times. You need to create those good men. And right now those good men are being made. They are in the younger generations. I would say even just starting at Gen Z. There's some good millennials, but it's going to take some time, but faster than you would think. 10 years, a lot of people will be able to run for the presidency. Vivek, who is one of the youngest candidates to ever run for the presidency. That sort of thing will happen. And it's going to happen naturally, not even just beating out these seats. Like, all these boomers are going to die off of natural causes in the next 10 or 20 years. And even before that, they're totally going to lose the ability to function. I mean, look, like Mitch McConnell, like seriously, he's still trying to hold on to power. He's losing his ability to actually function in Congress. Same thing with Biden. People are going to argue the same thing about Trump. Like, if Trump gets in for 4 years, like, it'd be great if he could make it through 4 years. Who knows? He's old. They're all old. And so that whole class is going to graduate. And the whole team's going to get filled up, right? Like your whole basketball team was all seniors. There's no juniors. There's no sophomores on the team. There's a bunch of freshmen who are redshirted. And what's going to happen is all the seniors are going to graduate, and the entire team, the entire body of Congress, the entire judicial system, the entire executive legislative system, all of those are going to be filled with the freshmen, the young people, the people who are very far to the right or very far to the left. But hopefully, with a slight ideological change, with the ability to campaign better, with the realization that liberal policies have failed both the country and the states that reside within it, you will have a far right swing. Those people will take power. They will reinstate order. That sense of order will alleviate any desire from conservative states to leave. And the reality of living, as an example, a lifestyle that is conducive to a happy, healthy, functioning human being, namely family, community, religion, hobbies, interests that point you to skills, a lack of escapist desires, encouraging your self-motivation, your ability to grow as a person, your desire to fight against a sinful human nature, not fall to it. All of those things will build and be an example to other people, and I think that ideology will spread. So that is my grandiose take on what's happening in the current state of America and what I actually think is going to happen in both the near and far future. We'll have to see how this goes, because the number one thing that's going to change that tree of possible branching out is this 2024 election. If Trump wins or Biden wins, that will dramatically change the future of this country. This is probably the most important election in America's history for the fact of where it will leave us with people's faith in the government, faith in elections, where we're going to be at politically, ideologically. That's all going to change. Even our place in the world stage will change depending on this election. So pay attention, vote for what you believe to be right, do some research, and think about the problems we face, the end goal you desire, the worldview that you want to live in, and the mechanisms that will get you there. And for this election, the mechanisms are either the Conservative Party, led by Donald Trump, or the Democratic Party, led by Joe Biden. So those are your options. That's where you have to consider what mechanism will get you to the end goal you desire and the country that you want to live in for future generations, and a perspective outlook on how that will change and grow closer to where you believe the country should be. So I really appreciate you watching. I am planning on doing more live streams like this in the future very regularly. If you have any questions at any time during live stream, you can throw them in the chat. Totally willing to go off topic and answer anything people desire of that. But I really appreciate you watching. Stay tuned for more, and have a great night.